Welcome back to Yield Today. I'm here with Adam Hart. He is a life coach, transformation coach, digestitarian, author. He's a cool guy, and we've already enjoyed the pre-conversation. So I appreciate you jumping on, Adam.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Dallin. Appreciate it.
Yeah, so you're diagnosed with ADHD at 12. Was that like a big shock, or what was really known about it back then?
Yeah. No, all I heard from my folks was that I had a hard time settling down and was very impulsive and was bouncing off the walls all the time. So, I'd hear from my mom, stop bouncing off the walls. And, then that one day where I was taken to the doctor's office for medication, it was like, oh, so is there something wrong with me or, what are we doing here? And, yeah, I didn't really think there was anything wrong, but obviously the folks did.
Yeah. It's interesting because like you're at that young age, and so you're just like I'm me, and there's nothing wrong there. And I think especially as you grow up and as you go through these different things, it's easy to have something like ADHD kind of create a block, and now you're sort of against the wall thinking maybe there is like a lot of things wrong with me. And the thing that we sometimes forget is like what you teach is there's a ton of different strategies and things we can do to make the most of and learn the most from that thing, because maybe a part of the reason why we have that thing is so we can do things that weren't possible, like we're just in that route, we're always in that place, so we're able to talk about it, we're thinking about it. So yeah, maybe it's a
Yeah,
blessing.
I know for me it definitely impacted me in a negative way. Just being labeled in that way. I was at the same time was told I was learning disabled and put in a separate classroom at school. And yeah, I mean, I wasn't enjoying the environment. I think you mentioned before we started recording this idea of being a product of your own environment. I wasn't inspired by what was happening around me, and so my inclination was to just go explore and be free. And that obviously goes against what society is telling us we need to be like, especially in a school setting at that age where, okay, well, you're not behaving the way we're telling you to behave, so we're going to medicate you so that you are behaving the way we want you to behave. Not to say that there isn't some real clinical things that might be under a diagnosis of ADHD, but in my case, it was more of me just wanting to be free. And I started to have real issues with self esteem, real issues with self worth and shame and guilt just for being told I was different in that way and being put on medication. It was like, well, okay, maybe there is something wrong with me. And it took me a while to shed that layer of my self identity, which I got fortunate that I was able to do that, but it took a while.
Yeah, it's interesting for me because I know I flew under the radar a little bit. Like I wasn't diagnosed until like 20, and I had
Hmm.
video games, I had basketball, and I had sports or running, and those are all things that really helped like stabilize me, which
Hmm.
helped. But I also think of like back in fourth grade, I would we still did assignments with writing mostly, and I had a there was somebody who looked at my writings like, man, he probably has all kinds of mental difficulties if that's how he writes. And so I was put into
Hmm.
this group of kids that weren't even really able to read very well. And it's like, this is where you belong. And I was there for like a week, like, no, this is not. Like, you are way beyond this. And so we make these quick judgments, and it has stuck with me though. Like you can't afford to do that, because if you put somebody in this box, I mean, you're speaking from experience and from feeling it really did affect you.
Yeah. Well, and years later, as I dove into the biology of my own mind, which, turned into how I now make a living, which is a really beautiful thing. But so much of that came down to recognizing, okay, so what happens to a brain at this young age when it gets labeled in this way? And when we recognize that it's a pretty hefty stress response. And so if you look at the brain being a beautiful organ, but it is a survival organ. And so it's going to do what it can to get its main source of energy, which is adrenaline. And adrenaline comes from the fight or flight stress response. And so I know now that a large part of my ADHD was because my brain recognized, ooh, if I create these certain thoughts about Adam, he's going to self identify as those, and it's going to create a stress response. And therefore, I get adrenaline from it. it took me a long time to learn how to teach my brain to let go of those thoughts, which also helped me in the end manage how ADHD was for my own experience around the impulsiveness and the attention side of things. You know, it was all through understanding that I just have to learn how to nourish my brain in the way that it doesn't use this label as a way to become a crutch of any kind.
It's wild because I resonate with this a lot with times in college where I put off this assignment really late, and then all of a sudden I'm like jumping into this quiz of like half an hour to do it, and it's like 10 questions. It's like accounting. It's like you're supposed to take like 10 minutes on each question. Like, how are you going to
Yeah.
get any kind of decent score? You know, I got like such a low grade, and that was the first time I took accounting, and I was definitely more of a I let myself be more of a victim to that kind of part of the brain chemistry. And yeah, it's tough, especially when these things happen and we don't like call ourselves out on it a ton. But we also need to be compassionate about that calling, because then it can lead into that shame that we were talking about a little bit earlier.
Well, and procrastination is really one of the ways the brain self sabotages us. You know, it's one of the main forms of self sabotage, and so for somebody who like myself who is diagnosed ADHD, it's just again it just gives the brain more fuel to say, "Ooh, okay, now I'm going to start to pattern so much of how I was experiencing school back then." And yeah, I wouldn't do my assignments until the day before or study for an exam until the day before, find all sorts of excuses to, to stay up till 2, 3 in the morning till I finally opened the book. But yeah, it really, for me, my life changed when I learned how to create space from what my thoughts were doing. Right. And that the big one for me was when I discovered rock climbing. Rock climbing, all of a sudden there's these moments where I was able to feel at peace, feel calm, and recognize, wow, so what am I doing here when I'm climbing? And there's this element of creating presence that I wasn't taught I could actually do when I was a child, that was always available. This idea of how do you reset your own stress response and teach your brain to be okay with how life is versus having your brain run the show and you just live up in your mind and get lost in thought all the time. So there's a way to do this where we can be at peace.
Yeah, it's interesting how you bring in the rock climbing, how that rock climbing like provided that like space for you. You like for me, I made an episode not too long ago about creating a space for your thoughts to go, right? Like for me, it helps to know like with certain songs they usually are equated with certain runs that I do, and I know that I can like put like everything into that, and there's like no judgment. It's like the running is such a win that I don't really worry about like anything else that's attached to it, because the running itself, like the
Hmm.
process, I know that it's a win, and it always leads to like better things down the road. Like it happened actually earlier this week. I've been putting off like doing my sprints where I time how fast I can run this certain route multiple times. And after I did it this week, not only did I break my previous record, I was able to just be like so calm and able to just go into the rest of the things. And I equated it to like sort of like climbing up a really high like ski lift. And all of a sudden I'm at the top and I can just go down at that point. Do you experience something like that, or what's it kind of
Yeah.
like for you with rock climbing?
Yeah, well, I mean, the idea of the runner's high is a very real biological state. It's our natural state of holistic flow, and that has a certain mixture of chemicals in the body, neurotransmitters and hormones. And so when we learn that we can actually play with those ourselves, we can transform how we're experiencing everything in life. It just so happens that sports is one that is a quick access to those states of flow. Running is a perfect example. Climbing, that was another one. But what I realized from accessing those was, wow, okay, so what am I actually doing here when I go for a run or when I go for a climb? What's happening in my own biology? And as I learned that what was happening was that I was training my brain to not deny me access to feeling into what's known as our parasympathetic nervous system, the calm, rest, and digest state. I realized, wow, okay, I'm actually resetting my nervous system. And I grew up living in fight or flight. I mean, it just seems like most of us, that's our experience. So if we don't know there's an alternative available and that we can actually produce that ourselves, we just live our lives without knowing. And so sports is a great way to learn that that's something you can feel into. But then, okay, how do I now bring that on the next time I'm walking in for an exam? Or the next time I'm going on a date for the first time, or the next time I'm gonna hit the bar and I don't want to drink so much. How do I work with my own stress response about everything so that I can be at peace and present in the experience? And we can do that.
It's so easy to self-medicate. It's so easy to self-medicate with things that are not meant to be self-medicated with. I personally don't drink. I'm not against anybody who does, but for me, like there's ways that, kind of like activating the parasympathetic nervous system. There's ways to
Yeah.
get to that, and even if it seems less exciting in the beginning, like that is ultimately going to get you to a really good place, and people will respect you for sticking to something that you feel is like good for you, you know?
Yeah, and it takes something. I've worked in the space of addiction for many years, and there's an element of when we don't recognize how the brain is functioning, it will start to pattern certain ways of our behavior, certain habitual actions that we can identify them as we are escaping our life. Something's not working quite well, so I'm going to grab the sugar, which was my big one, or I'm going to grab the phone and scroll for the next hour in social media, or I'm going to drink or alcohol or shopping or gambling. There's so many that are available for us that become our escapes of our lives, and it's coming from the fact that our brain is locked into these patterns of wanting to be fed energy. So we have the fight or flight stress response, which is the adrenaline, which that's the number one source of energy for the brain. But then there's all the dopamine based habits, and that's the escaping ones. That's another source of beautiful energy for the brain, but yet we're not interacting with the brain in a way that teaches it to not continue to feed off of that. And so it ends up being a large part of how these thoughts are constructed in our minds and how we live our lives. But yet there's not a lot of fulfillment and flow and ease to it. And so in order for us to start to create some separation, we have to learn how to activate that other side of our nervous system, that calmer state. And that's not so hard to do. We've never really been given the right tools to do that, other than here's some medication, here's some counseling, therapy, and I'm not knocking any of that, but that never worked for me. What worked for me was recognizing that I could actually reset my own stress response in the moments of life that it was happening.
Yeah.
And in the moments like heart flow, which we talked about earlier, that's something that I know you just discovered, but that's my breath practice that takes 33 seconds, and it gives you the chance to reset your own mind and your body in that same moment so that you can feel at peace with what's happening. And that opens the doorway for so much more possibility.
Yeah. Would you be able to just kind of walk the listeners through the heart flow thing real quick? I think
Yeah,
they get a
yeah.
quick kick out of that.
Well, again, this came from my discovery through rock climbing, and I don't know if you've ever traveled through the City of Rocks in Idaho, but there's so many beautiful different places you can go and rock climb. But for me, it was in the climbing experience, I would be in a real fight or flight scenario. So that's a real moment. You have to reset that. You can't be up. I'd be hundreds of feet up on the wall, and I'd have a panic attack or anxiety attack, and I'd have to calm that down. Otherwise, I could die. But what I realized in my ability to calm that down was, okay, most of my life feels kind of like this. I feel very anxious about, my financial situation, about where am I going with my career, about, these relationships that aren't working quite the way I want them to. And they all had that similar energy. And so when I discovered how I was resetting my nervous system in climbing, I said to myself, what if I started to bring the same resetting that I'm doing climbing into my everyday life? And when I did all the research into what I was doing, it was a very specific breath practice That takes 33 seconds. I call it heart flow, and it's based off of the science of this is known as heart rate variability, HRV. And essentially what you're doing is you're doing a sequential 3 breaths in and out of 4 seconds in, 7 seconds out. 4 in, 7 out, 4 in, 7 out. Rotation of 3 times, that's 33 seconds. The key to this working and resetting your stress response is the rhythm. So when you do sit peacefully and quietly and you're just really working with your breath in this way, you just want to keep it nice and smooth as far as the rhythm goes. And what you'll notice is if you honor that, you come out of the other end of those 33 seconds and your brain is operating differently. You feel more peaceful, you feel more calm, and you actually have your executive function turned back on, the frontal lobe of the brain, the focus, the motivation. It all comes from doing this work. But at the same time, you're also strengthening what's called your vagus nerve. This is the beautiful nerve that connects the heart to the brain in a way where you realize, wow, okay, I'm not knocking all the things that we're told to do, the meditation, the yoga, the diets, the fitness. But when you work with this and you're committed to practicing this multiple times a day, you realize, wow, I don't actually need to do a whole lot to feel more peaceful, to feel more fulfilled, more energized, more focused. So that's heart flow. And yeah, I mean, and you watched a video of this, and I appreciate, you made a nice comment on the YouTube channel. But yeah, I'm happy to share that video. It's free and it walks you through all the steps, but pretty straightforward and really powerful.
Yeah, it's a good video. I definitely would recommend just giving it a listen. I mean, for me, it's just like for me when I first did it, I just was able to, I was like, wow, I just did that, and that was really quick, and it wasn't like I felt like any ridiculous like, oh wow, now I feel like I can take over the world or whatever. It's just like, wow, I just acted on something from a YouTube video almost instantly, whereas a lot of my YouTube use kind of goes with the fight or flight response at least a little bit, where you're like oh, I'm interested in this, and I jump into something else and they pique your emotions or whatever. And it's it was really refreshing to watch it and just immediately be putting it to work. And that is something that they talk about in marketing all the time, is if you can help your customer get like one tiny little win, like don't focus on changing their life, change like their day or change their hour, like that
Yeah.
is going to lead us so much. And at the very least, I'm like, well, I like what Adam's doing, at least at a very basic level. There's no doubt, because you've already made a difference.
Yeah. No, I appreciate it. And, it doesn't require us overhauling our entire lives to start to feel a little happier with our lives. And that's what we're being sold with, the whole push towards consumption. It's the same with dieting and fitness programs and more this, more that. It's like, well, really, all we really need to do is start to get in tune with presence, with being here right now, which is a biological state. And that comes from activating your vagus nerve in a way where your mind isn't constantly driving you into the future, which is where it loves to live because it creates a lot of anxiety. And so the more you practice heart flow in that way, your brain, you start to recognize, well, my brain is now getting upset with this. It doesn't like it. You practice it for a day or 2 days. And like I tell all my clients, I'm like, 3 times a day or more. It's less than 2 minutes a day. But you'll notice after day 3 or day 4, you're going to feel so much more peaceful. But then your mind is going to say, wait a minute. You're not as reactive. You're not giving me the same amount of adrenaline as you were a couple days ago. I'm going to make these thoughts louder and make you feel crazy. But if you really recognize that noise that starts to ramp up in your own mind and you keep on it, all of a sudden the mind starts to let go of a lot of that stuff. And now there's new space to work from, which is a beautiful place.
Yeah, I agree. When you expect those things to happen, then you can kind of embrace it when it comes in instead of like pushing it away. It's like, oh, I expected that this would happen because
That's it.
this is uncomfortable, or this is not something I'm super used to. And
Yeah.
yeah, that it's a different conversation when you expect it.
Yeah, and it almost becomes so ridiculous how loud your mind gets because it's upset. It's like, you give a bag of candy to a child and then you take the bag of candy away. What's the child going to do? So all of a sudden now you're shifting the amount of hormones the brain is getting. It's not getting the same amount of cortisol and adrenaline it was getting even a day or before, or 2 days before. It's going to be upset. It's like, well, give me back my candy. So, but what it does provide us, it gives us space to start to be more fulfilled in this moment, which is where we can live more aligned to what gives us passion, what gives us purpose. And that's where for me the nutrition piece came in. All of a sudden, I was doing this on a consistent basis every day. I was really engaging with my own stress response, my own ADHD mind, and training my mind to be okay, to be safe, to not feed off of my adrenaline, to not feed off of all the sugar, the dopamine from sugar. And next thing I knew, it transformed my relationship to food in a way where, that became my new passion. Was, wow, okay, I have space now to explore nutrition in a new way, which led to my book, The Power of Food, which, I know we're going to chat a little bit about that, but it's such a beautiful thing to allow space for new, fresh, internal experiences to be how you get to live. And this was a big one.
Yeah, food's interesting because for me, getting into track back in high school, the exercise was definitely there and the rest was getting a lot better and I saw that quickly turn into better performance. And then diet also needed to change too because when in running and just with any kind of thing, it gets to its point like you're running like literally 10 or 11 seconds like faster or less. You're just trying to shave off a couple seconds and so like the gap gets farther and farther the better and better you get at it.
Oh.
So bring it down a little bit for us. Where should we start or rather even where should I start, because I'm trying to build muscle right now, not like actively or anything, but just in general, I'd like to be able to do that. And I've been a little bit of a hard gainer, like in the
Hmm.
past, like that time was when I was able to put on the most weight because it was all muscle and with all the lifting and stuff I was doing too. Whereas if I'm not doing that stuff actively, it seems like I just sort of I just sort of like stay in this like skinny like thing, which is fine. It's like I love myself as I am, but I also am like I want to get better, keep improving. I want to be able to dunk a basketball again and push people around more, kind of thing. I'd like to
Yeah, I
use
love
my
it.
height to its full ability.
Yeah. How tall are you?
I'm 6'5" Like it's
Oh, yeah.
yeah. So the joke is that I tell everybody it's really funny because I came up with this maybe like a month ago, and it's funny. I'm like, so I would have been like 6'6" like Michael Jordan, but there's just a couple of days in high school where I just didn't sleep enough. I was doing the gaming YouTube channel back then, and there's definitely at least a couple days where I stayed up probably a little bit
Yeah.
too late working on that. But yeah, I'm
Yeah.
like 6'5" plus, and I can still jump pretty well. I mean, I'm also really young, so but
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. Well, on the nutrition front too, I mean, it's like fingerprints. We all have our own very unique interaction with nutrition that needs to be honored. It's not about, hey, you should try keto and you should be on a paleo diet. It's like, it's all about how are things metabolizing in your own body to really be utilized in a way that makes you feel good. And so, I always say the number one thing is consistent energy, consistent mental, physical energy. The rest will start to evolve on its own. And for that, on the nutrition front, I've always worked in a way where myself and for my clients is it's about what can we add in that is going to help you experiment with how this is providing you with more energy. Not what can we eliminate, because as soon as we start eliminating, it gives the brain fuel for the stress response, right? It's like as soon as you're told, well, you can't eat any more of that, or you can't drink this, or then you're in trouble because your brain is just going to run amok with it. It's going to learn from that stress and it's going to create more thoughts that will keep you stuck in it. So let's look at things that you can add in. For me, it was, and a great place to start is digestible protein. What can you find in terms of a protein source that's easier on your body to digest? Now, there's so much in terms of like collagen powder is a big, huge one, which I am a fan of. But for me, there was one food more than any other when I was into to my climbing days, and I did at some point was working towards becoming a rock climbing guide, like a mountain guide, and in that period, it's all about strength and endurance. And hemp seeds was my number one source of protein. How hemp seeds, it's a, obviously we know as a plant, but it's a beautiful seed that's a complete protein, right? And just by adding that in, all of a sudden I realized, well, every time I add hemp seeds in, which is a much easier form of digestible protein than a lot of meat-based protein, I felt more energy. I felt more clarity in my mind, but I also physically felt stronger. And so I just started adding hemp seeds into everything I was eating without having to eliminate anything. And it gave me more sustained energy.
That's cool. Yeah. I haven't really heard too much about that. My mom used to make me shakes back in the day, and she was into like Zija and Moringa and all that other stuff. So I was sort of like guinea pig a little bit with some of that stuff, and I think overall it helped. But yeah, I think for me, I've come to understand that a lot of it is creating something that you enjoy, that you're excited about, that you want to keep doing, and that just is such a big part of it, you know? When you're able to experiment, you land on something like this works for me. I enjoyed. It's not too extremely difficult to do. Now we can make some really good headway, and I think I need to do some experimenting with that. But yeah, I think the next step
Yeah.
would be making more green shakes, and then maybe having some hemp seeds or something like that. Starting
Well,
there.
I mean, I remember learning about spirulina and chlorella, back in the day when I was really in, the whole foodie scene. And if you've ever tried any of those things, ugh, it's like the taste is so horrible. Like, yeah, okay, so this is good for me, but there's no way I'm eating this stuff on a long-term basis. So, yeah, I mean, you want it to be fun. Hemp. Anyway, as an example, hemp seeds. When I discovered it, I was like, wow, this is doesn't. It's got such a nice nutty taste to it. It's like, well, what else can I do with it? And all of a sudden, I started to make everything that I would normally use, for example, like milk. So I kind of cut out my dairy intake because I realized, wow, for me, dairy is very inflammatory. So what if I tried using hemp? And I all of a sudden I put hemp in a blender with some water and turned it on, and it was like this frothy milk. I was like, holy crap, I just made hemp milk. And it worked. And so I've been making that for, 15 years now. And my kids are 8 and 10, and they use hemp milk for their cereal. And it's anyway, it's finding creative ways to use other types of food that you can learn how it digests for you in a way where it optimizes your performance.
Dude, that is wild. Like, way to go. That's super neat. Like, you just dropped that out of nowhere. That was solid. So, yeah, you've been making milk out of this stuff, and it sounds like you've been trying so many different things with it. So, where do you get your hemp seeds from then? You just get it from Walmart or
Yeah,
online?
Costco. Costco's got hemp seeds now. I mean, so many different grocery stores now. Back when I discovered it, it was still pretty out there to even consider having hemp seeds. Which, with all the consideration to, are you actually, consuming cannabis and all the psychoactive side of things. But this is a kind of a family based version of that's got no properties related to cannabis, that is super digestible and is now pretty much found in almost every grocery store. Not sure down in your area, but I know up here, I'm on the west coast of Canada, it's like every grocery store has hemp seeds now. So it's pretty easy to find. And when I make the hemp milk, I'm using like a quarter cup of hemp seeds to like 3 cups of water. And I got recipes online, and in my book, The Power of Food, obviously there's recipes, but you can make a liter of hemp milk for under $1. That's like a
Wow.
huge jar of hemp milk
Yeah.
for, so cost wise too, it's, you're getting a very nutritious food and a fraction of the cost of what, regular milk might cost.
It's interesting too, because for me, I've just felt so much when I like make something myself, like even like when I started like making rice in college, I just felt this like love for myself, be like, wow, I can do that too, kind of thing. So I'm excited to experiment with some of that stuff and to check your book out, The Power of Food. I mean, I just typed in The Power of Food, Google, and it's just like right there. So I'm like, you got that made. So that's pretty sweet. I'm excited
Yeah.
to dive more into it. But yeah,
Well,
like
I
what are
like how you
some
say that, right? Like I like how you say the connection to self-love was a huge piece for me that I didn't grow up with that connection. And as I learned how to nourish my nervous system through climbing and felt what it felt like to feel self-love in that way, and then all of a sudden manifested nutrition into my world in this way, it was all about extending the time that I was immersed in caring for myself. You know, because when you start to play around with food, it's like, well, you got to go to the grocery store, you got to buy the ingredients, you got to come home, you got to cut it all up and prepare it. Then you get to consume it or share it with somebody. And then you got to do the whole cleaning process. So now all of a sudden, I was spending hours engaged in that kind of self care energy that it was powerful.
It's powerful when you do that for yourself consistently and you know you can look forward to it. That's something I did in 2022, which there's all kinds of lessons I learned in 2022, like from like
Mm.
splitting my foot open and being in a wheelchair and graduating from college
Mm.
without a job and a lot of other like going to Alaska and being a camp counselor. Like, I learned a lot of different stuff in 2022, but one thing I learned for myself was there was times where I didn't want to go on my runs at like 20 degrees or whatever, back in September, October in Utah, because that's where
Yeah.
I was at the time. But I had this like drink that I made for myself. It was just the emergency like raspberry flavor, and I really liked it. And I'm like, this is what is ahead for you if you just do this run. And it's like the run is automatically a win. Like, just literally get out there and it's a win, right?
Yeah.
And just I don't know. It's beautiful when you're able to like help yourself feel that love, and it's not conditional. It's not any of those things. It's just you're rewarding yourself, and that's something I've been doing more with video games too. Is I find that
Mm.
I like being able to spend time in those creative worlds. Not so much that I'm like spending all my time there, but it's fun to like jump in and sort of have my brain get to explore, and that's led to podcast episodes and other things. So yeah, create
Yeah.
that space for yourself.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And you just know if you're using them as an escape, you feel it because there's always a symptom involved with that, whether it's a thought symptom like guilt or shame, or a physical one where you're just overly tired and can't focus well. And so, as long as we're being mindful of our symptoms, there's always opportunities to add in self-love, even if it's a quick walk around the block. That's huge. It doesn't have to be a huge arduous fitness program or another massive diet. It's like the more I focused on adding in these little acts of self-love, they started to become these little rituals that allowed me to spend more time immersed in the energy of my own self-love. Right. And nutrition was one of those. Sleep became another one where I started focusing on my sleep environment and how can I set that up so it's not an entertainment center, but actually a place that I honor my sleep. So yeah, there's lots of opportunities to start to look at our lives in this way that make things, just flow with more ease. And in the end, especially with the ADHD mind, that was a critical piece, was understanding that the more I set things up so that I keep nourishing my mind and not give it fuel for feeding off the stress, there was a lot of freedom in that and allowed me to keep pursuing the things that meant the most to me. And yeah, it's been, I don't know how many 50-year-olds you get on your podcast, but I just turned 50 2 weeks ago and I feel like I'm still in my 20s, actually better than I was in my 20s because back then I was in pretty rough shape. But it has everything to do with how I have set up these daily routines in a way that I feel nourished.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I just love that last thing you said, like setting up the daily routine so you feel nourished, you feel understood and loved, and you're just able to build that those pieces of yourself, those building blocks, because you have the building blocks, you have those things, and it's just putting them to work, and it really doesn't take a ton of time usually. It
No.
really doesn't. So there's heart
Yeah.
flow. I mean, there's making hemp seed milk. I mean, it's funny. It's fun to chat about these things with you, and I look forward to having you back on if you're open to it, because I'd like to. Hopefully, I'll be in a way better physical shape and I won't be in my parents' house and stuff. It'll be fun to jam again. But yeah, I just loved what you said about like rock climbing and flow and just all this other stuff. Is there anything else you would add, maybe for somebody that is just transitioning out of college and or is trying to figure out what they're doing, and how do we find your book and all that other stuff?
Yeah. Even for you, in terms of what your thought process is about where you are right now, being in your parents' home and whatever it's saying about that, be mindful of the stress response it's creating because it's learning from the stress it's creating. And so if you notice, wow, this isn't where I want to be. Okay, where do you want to be? So being able to start to get in touch with the emotional state of what you do want is the next step in all of this. Maybe we can do another podcast around all that, but this is the manifestation piece. It's like, okay, now that I have more peace and calm from my mind telling me my life isn't quite what I want it to be, how do I let it evolve to how I want it to be my reality now? And so, yeah, I appreciate the chance to share with you. Obviously, it's a short little conversation on this stuff, but super powerful. My book, you can find my book. It's in every major bookstore across North America, as well as off Amazon. And anybody who wants to download some of my material, I have the 6 steps in relation to unleashing our energy. So it's the Unleash Your Energy Roadmap. You can find it on my website at clearimpact.io, and it's a free download.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I'll have links to all that in the show notes. And I guess one other thing I'd say, like with the writing piece, like for me, I'm so good at visualizing and imagining. And so what I've been doing recently is I check in with different ages of myself. So the
Mm.
eight-year-old version of myself, I check in with him, and I'll check in with the 30-year-old version of myself a couple years from now, and I check in with the 80-year-old version. I do that daily lately. That's what I've been doing, and I pretend that they're giving me advice, and it really helps ground me. And for me, that might make zero sense to anybody else, but for me, like it's beautiful and it's so interesting because eventually I will get to those different levels. There's no question about it. The time's going to go by either way. And so that's why I'm
That's
so
it.
glad that I'm talking with people like you and having people like you and still doing this podcast. Like there's times where I'm like, oh, should I keep doing the podcast? But I do enjoy it. There's no doubt about it. And I would miss it if it just, like tomorrow is gone. I would miss it terribly. So I'm really, yeah,
Yeah.
just thankful for your conversation and the thoughts and stuff. And look forward to chatting again down the road.
Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate it, Don. Thanks for having me.